question that we've had about ecophany, the idea of an environmental awakening. Did you have an environmental awakening?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I didn't recognize it as being a kind of awakening when it happened, because I was so immersed in what felt to me like the most intense cataclysmic experience that I'd ever had. And I still remember when it happened. It was just quite bizarre.
Can you describe that?
So yeah, so I mean, in the lead up to this event, I'd been immersing myself in the literature on climate change and the climate breakdown. And as you know, I mean, I have a PhD in psychology, so I consider myself to be not unintelligent, but I didn't get how bad things were. I really didn't get how bad things were. And what happened to me is something that Roger Hallam actually describes as, when he in some of his interviews, when he talks with people, he says, you're describing the situation, but you're not feeling it.
Yeah.
And so what I was doing was simply reading the facts and hearing how bad things were, but I hadn't actually felt it. And then when I did feel it, and it was an intense experience, it was almost as if all of my senses somehow sort of fused around this experience. And I've recently been looking at or revisiting some work by Steve Taylor. And Steve Taylor is a psychologist who works in the UK. And his area of research is specifically on spiritual awakenings and what they are. Okay. And the way he describes it kind of resonates with what happened to me. So he describes it as the ego lifts, the ego vacates the room, and that then creates a space for this enlightened other to then inhabit that space. And that's kind of what happened to me. So it was almost as if I became one with everything around me. It's very hard to describe something that has so many different complex attributes.
Yeah. And how?
So that's what happened. And the key thing about it for me is that it's been irreversible. It's completely changed how I feel and how I see my connection.
How long ago was this?
So this would have been about 3 years ago now. Yeah.
So prior to 3 years, you sort of knew a bit about like the ecosystem and like climate and stuff, but when you started to drill down and to understand it, there's a point at which you had like that aha moment, and you saw that you were a part of it as opposed to apart from it.
Yeah, exactly. And the key thing about that was to really feel it and to experience it.
Yeah.
So, and that's not the same as simply reading something. It's not the same as reading a text which says we're all a part of nature. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so what you're describing there is what in Vita we refer to as ecophany, an ecological epiphany, right? And it's simply that an awakening. But I think what you've suggested is that these awakenings, they're not reversible. The point is that when you wake up to something, you can't go back to sleep again about it.
Exactly. You can't unsee it. You can't unknow it. Yeah.
And if you're self-empowered and you have that awakening, then you can change your circumstances in order to be a part of that solution, which is really, I mean, you left academia to become effectively a climate activist. Really.
That's right. That's right. I once I'd had this awakening, it completely changed how I viewed my career, how I viewed myself, how I viewed what I was doing, and it just made it impossible for me to continue with a career because the goals that I'd had previously were somehow no longer relevant.
Yeah.
And that could have been quite catastrophic actually, to realize that everything you've been doing for the past 20 or 30 years is actually, apart from having my children, of course, but that realization that all of that was actually really irrelevant, that it had been futile, that I'd been focused on completely the wrong things. It could have been catastrophic. It wasn't, because for me it was very motivating. It's kind of really energized me. And it's very important to note also that I'm very aware that being able to leave my job was kind of an exercise in privilege. Not everyone can do that.
Sure.
I get that. Yeah.
And what was your job? You were senior in academic circles. What was your
Yeah,
role?
I was what's called a pro vice chancellor at a university. So I was basically running a university.
Yeah.
And
Which university?
yeah, so I had a yeah, sorry.
Sorry, which university was that?
I was running Arden University, which is a new university in the Midlands in the UK.
Okay.
And that was a job I loved, and I had lovely colleagues. I really enjoyed it. But not looking at Arden in particular, but just looking at the sector as a whole, it just seemed to me that what academia is doing is gearing young people up for a future that doesn't exist.